President Trump is ramping up attacks against the federal judge at the center of a deportation standoff with his administration. In a contentious hearing yesterday, Judge James Boasberg accused the Trump administration of disrespecting the court and ignoring orders after they deported suspected Venezuelan gang members last week. Boasberg is still considering whether their use of the wartime alien enemy's power is legal, but a ban against such deportations remains in effect for another week. The president is spending part of the weekend at his private club in Bedminster, New Jersey. Nicole Sganga is in Bridgewater. Nicole, good morning.
Good morning, Meg. The president starts his day here in New Jersey before heading to Philadelphia to watch the NCAA Wrestling Championships. But as you mentioned, a very different face-off took place in a courtroom yesterday as a federal judge voiced skepticism over the Trump administration's use of that wartime power.
Okay, so Donald Trump just made what might be the biggest mistake of his entire legal saga, and that is saying a lot, given how many legal disasters we've covered on this channel. We're talking about a moment that legal experts are calling absolutely catastrophic for Trump's position in multiple cases. Because here's what happened. A federal judge issued an order for nationwide asset seizure against Trump. We're talking about properties, bank accounts, investments, everything being targeted for potential seizure to satisfy massive court judgments. And instead of doing what any sane person with competent legal advice would do, which is stay quiet, let your lawyers handle it, don't make things worse, Trump went on a public tirade insulting the judge personally, called him biased, corrupt, part of a witch hunt, all the usual Trump attacks. But here's the problem. When you're facing asset seizure, when a judge has the power to literally take everything you own, publicly attacking that judge is not just stupid, it's potentially contempt of court, and it gives the judge every reason to accelerate the seizure process and show zero mercy in enforcement. Trump just took a bad situation and made it exponentially worse through his own inability to control himself. And what makes this even more devastating is the timing, because this asset seizure order is connected to multiple judgments against Trump, the massive fraud case, the defamation cases, all of it coming due at the same time. And now Trump has personally antagonized the one person who controls whether he gets any leeway in how those seizures are executed. Now, before we go any further, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. They're either going to focus on Trump's insults without explaining the legal implications, or they're going to downplay the severity of the asset seizure because they don't want to seem biased. That's why we built this channel, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines and understand what's actually happening in Trump's legal cases, not just the drama, but the real consequences, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. We bring the news straight to you every single day, breaking down complex legal issues, explaining what judges can actually do, and showing you how Trump's own behavior keeps making his situation worse. Just hit the subscribe button below to join us. And if you want to support this work and be part of a community that truly cares about accountability and the rule of law, this is your moment. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and drop a comment with your thoughts on whether Trump's insults are going to cost him everything he owns. I want to hear what you think about a former president who can't stop attacking judges even when those judges control his financial future. All right, let's get back to the video. Here's what happened. The judge overseeing enforcement of multiple civil judgments against Trump issued a nationwide asset seizure order. This is an incredibly serious legal mechanism that allows courts to identify, freeze, and ultimately seize assets to satisfy unpaid court judgments. We're not talking about a minor thing here. We're talking about the court having the authority to take Trump's properties, to seize money from his bank accounts, to go after his investments and business interests, all to collect on the hundreds of millions of dollars in judgments that Trump owes and hasn't paid. The order specifically authorizes federal marshals and court-appointed receivers to identify Trump assets nationwide, not just in New York, where most of his properties are, but everywhere, Florida, New Jersey, California, internationally, if necessary. It allows those officials to freeze assets immediately to prevent Trump from transferring or hiding them, and it establishes a framework for actually seizing and liquidating those assets if Trump continues to refuse to pay what he owes. Now, asset seizure orders like this are not issued lightly. Courts use them when there's evidence that a defendant is not going to voluntarily comply with judgments, when there's risk that assets will be hidden or transferred to avoid collection, when normal collection methods aren't working. The fact that a judge found it necessary to issue this kind of sweeping nationwide order tells you that the court has serious concerns about Trump's willingness to pay what he owes and about the possibility that he'll try to move assets beyond the court's reach. And those concerns are not unfounded because we've already seen reporting about Trump trying to shuffle assets, creating new corporate structures, potentially moving money offshore, all the things that defendants do when they're trying to avoid paying court judgments. So the judge issues this order, and Trump's response is to immediately go public with personal attacks on the judge. He didn't issue a measured statement through his lawyers saying they disagree with the order and will appeal it. He didn't stay quiet and let the legal process play out. He went on his social media platform and reportedly called the judge a partisan hack, accused him of being part of a corrupt system designed to destroy Trump, suggested the judge is taking orders from political enemies, all the classic Trump attacks that we've seen him use against every judge who rules against him. But here's why this is so much worse than Trump's usual judge bashing. When you're facing asset seizure, the judge overseeing that process has enormous discretion in how it gets executed. The judge decides how quickly it moves forward. The judge decides whether to grant stays or delays to allow the defendant time to arrange payment. The judge decides whether to allow the defendant to propose alternative payment arrangements. The judge controls everything about whether this process is going to be orderly and measured or swift and merciless. And Trump just gave that judge every reason to choose the swift and merciless option, because when you publicly insult a judge, when you attack their integrity and accuse them of corruption, you're not just being rude. You're potentially committing contempt of court, which is a separate offense that can result in fines and even jail time. You're showing the court that you have no respect for judicial authority and no intention of complying with court orders. And you're eliminating any sympathy or willingness to show flexibility that the judge might have otherwise had. Judges are human beings. They have enormous power, but they also have discretion in how they use it. And when someone repeatedly and publicly attacks them, insults them, questions their integrity, judges are much less likely to exercise that discretion in ways that benefit the person doing the attacking. Let me break down exactly what this asset seizure order allows the court to do, because I think a lot of people don't fully understand the scope of power that judges have once they've entered a judgment and the defendant isn't paying. First, the order authorizes identification of all Trump assets. That means court-appointed financial experts can subpoena Trump's bank records, his corporate records, his investment accounts, everything. They can force Trump to disclose under oath every asset he owns anywhere in the world. And if Trump fails to disclose something and they find it anyway, that's contempt and potentially fraud, which creates additional legal problems on top of the asset seizure itself. Second, the order allows immediate freezing of identified assets. Once they know what Trump owns, they can freeze it, which means Trump can't sell it, can't transfer it, can't use it as collateral, can't do anything with it. It's locked down until the court decides what happens next. Third, and this is the really serious part, the order allows actual seizure and liquidation. And if Trump continues to refuse to pay, the court can take his properties, auction them off, and use the proceeds to satisfy the judgments. We're talking about potentially seizing Trump Tower, Mar-a-Lago, his golf courses, everything that bears his name and that he's built his identity around for 50 years. The court can literally take it all and sell it to the highest bidder. Now, there are some procedural protections. Trump has rights to challenge the seizures, to argue about valuations, to propose alternative payment methods. But those protections only work if Trump plays by the rules and engages with the legal process in good faith. And everything about Trump's behavior, especially these public attacks on the judge, suggests he's not going to do that. He's going to fight and attack and insult and make everything as difficult as possible, which is only going to make judges less willing to give him any breaks. The judgments that this seizure order is meant to enforce are substantial, and they're piling up. There's the $355 million fraud judgment from the New York case, which with interest is now well over $400 million. There's the $83 million defamation judgment from the E. Jean Carroll case. There's the $5 million judgment from the first Carroll case. There are other pending cases with potential judgments on the horizon. We're talking about total liability that could exceed $500 million, and Trump hasn't paid any of it. He's been appealing, delaying, claiming he can't afford to post bonds, doing everything possible to avoid actually paying. And the courts are clearly running out of patience with that strategy, which is why we're now seeing asset seizure orders instead of just polite requests for payment. Now let's talk about why Trump's insults are so legally damaging beyond just making the judge angry. When you publicly attack a judge who's overseeing your case, You're creating evidence that can be used against you in contempt proceedings. Everything Trump posts on social media, everything he says at rallies, all of those public statements can be presented to the court as evidence of Trump's contempt for judicial authority and his intent to obstruct the legal process. Judges can and do use defendants' public statements as part of contempt findings. If Trump continues these attacks, the judge could issue a show cause order requiring Trump to appear in court and explain why he shouldn't be held in contempt. And if the judge finds contempt, the penalties can include fines, additional damages, and in extreme cases, jail time until the defendant agrees to comply with court orders. There's also the issue of how these attacks affect Trump's appeals. When you're appealing a judgment, you're asking higher courts to review what the lower court did and potentially overturn it. But appellate courts give enormous deference to trial judges, especially on factual findings and credibility determinations. When you publicly attack the trial judge and accuse them of bias and corruption, you're making it much easier for appellate courts to dismiss your appeals because you're essentially admitting that you don't respect the judicial process and that your appeals are just delay tactics rather than good faith legal arguments. Trump's attacks on judges have already hurt him in previous appeals, with appellate courts specifically citing his public statements as evidence of bad faith. And now he's doing the same thing again in an even more serious context where his entire financial empire is at stake. The nationwide scope of this seizure order is particularly significant because it means Trump can't just move assets to different states to avoid collection. Sometimes defendants try to game the system by transferring property to states where they think enforcement will be more difficult, but a nationwide order cuts off that option. Federal marshals in any state can enforce the order. Courts in any jurisdiction have to recognize it. Trump can't hide assets in Florida or New Jersey or anywhere else and claim they're beyond the reach of New York judgments. Everything is on the table. Everything can be seized, no matter where it's located. Let's talk about what this means for specific Trump properties that people know and that are central to his brand. Trump Tower in Manhattan, the building that's been the headquarters of the Trump Organization since the 1980s, is potentially subject to seizure. The court could appoint a receiver to take control of it, could order it sold to satisfy judgments. Mar-a-Lago, the Palm Beach estate that Trump has turned into his political headquarters and that he claims is worth over $500 million, that's on the table too. The golf courses, Trump National in Bedminster, courses in Scotland and Ireland, all of them are potential targets for seizure. These aren't just financial assets to Trump. These are the physical embodiments of his brand, his identity, his entire self-image as a successful real estate developer. The idea of courts seizing these properties and auctioning them off is probably more psychologically devastating to Trump than anything else that could happen to him, which might explain why he's lashing out so aggressively at the judge. But here's the thing, lashing out is only making it worse. Every insult, every attack, every accusation of corruption or bias, it all gives the judge more reason to move forward quickly and aggressively with the seizures rather than giving Trump time and flexibility to work something out. Like if Trump had competent legal advisors who he actually listened to, they would be telling him to shut up, to stop attacking judges, to engage constructively with the court about payment arrangements. But Trump has never been able to control himself when he feels attacked or cornered. His instinct is always to fight back, to insult, to claim he's being persecuted. And in this context, that instinct is suicidal for his legal and financial interests. The political implications of asset seizures are enormous. As we head toward 2026 midterms, Trump's entire political brand is built on being a successful businessman, a billionaire who can't be bought. But what happens to that brand when courts are literally seizing his properties because he can't or won't pay his debts? What happens when images of federal marshals taking control of Trump Tower or Mar-a-Lago are all over the news? Democrats are going to hammer this in campaign ads. They're going to show the asset seizures alongside Trump's claims of being a brilliant businessman. They're going to ask voters whether they really want to trust the economy to someone whose own business empire is being seized by courts. And those attacks are going to be devastating because they're backed by actual court orders and real seizures, not just political rhetoric. Republicans in Congress are going to be put in an impossible position. Do they defend Trump and claim the asset seizures are politically motivated persecution, which makes them look like they're defending someone who's refusing to pay legitimate court judgments? Or do they distance themselves from Trump, which risks alienating his base and potentially triggering primary challenges? There's no good option, and Trump's behavior, especially these public attacks on judges, makes it even harder for Republicans to defend him. because he keeps providing evidence of his own contempt for the legal system. The impact on Trump's ability to fund his political operation is also severe. If his assets are frozen or seized, he can't use them to raise money, can't borrow against them, can't liquidate them to fund campaigns. His political committees rely heavily on Trump's personal wealth and on his ability to leverage his properties for fundraising. Asset seizures would cripple that funding model and force Trump to rely entirely on small-dollar donations from supporters, which might not be enough to sustain a national political operation. We could see Trump's political influence decline, not because voters abandon him, but simply because he doesn't have the money to maintain his infrastructure and visibility. Now let's connect this to the broader pattern of Trump's behavior toward judges and the legal system. This isn't the first time Trump has attacked a judge overseeing his case. He did it during the fraud trial, calling the judge biased and corrupt throughout the proceedings. He did it in the Carroll cases, attacking the judge and the jury. He did it in his criminal cases, insulting judges and prosecutors constantly. There's a clear pattern of Trump believing that he can intimidate or influence judges through public attacks and political pressure. But that strategy has consistently backfired. Judges don't respond well to being attacked. They tend to dig in and become less flexible when defendants show contempt for their authority. And Trump keeps doing it anyway, either because he genuinely doesn't understand how counterproductive it is, or because he can't control his own impulses even when his lawyers are surely advising him to stay quiet. The legal community's response to Trump's attacks has been pretty consistent. Bar associations, legal ethics experts, former judges, they all condemn this kind of behavior as undermining the rule of law and the integrity of the judicial system. Some have called for contempt proceedings. Others have suggested that Trump's lawyers should be sanctioned for not controlling their clients' public statements. There's growing concern that Trump's normalization of attacking judges is having broader effects on public respect for courts and the legal system, that it's teaching people that it's okay to ignore court orders and insult judges when you don't like their rulings. That erosion of respect for judicial authority is dangerous for democracy, and it's happening in real time, largely because of Trump's example. So here's the bottom line. Trump is facing nationwide asset seizure orders that could result in courts literally taking everything he owns, his properties, his businesses, everything that makes him Trump. Instead of handling this carefully and respectfully, he publicly attacked the judge overseeing the seizures, calling him corrupt and biased. Those attacks are potentially contempt of court. They eliminate any possibility of the judge showing flexibility or mercy, and they provide evidence that Trump has no intention of complying with court orders. The judgments Trump owes total hundreds of millions of dollars, and he hasn't paid any of it, despite having assets that could theoretically satisfy those judgments. The asset seizure process is now moving forward with court-appointed officials identifying and freezing Trump properties. Specific properties like Trump Tower and Mar-a-Lago are potentially going to be seized and sold if Trump continues refusing to pay. The political implications are devastating as we head into midterms, and Trump's behavior, especially his inability to stop attacking judges, is making everything worse and accelerating his own financial destruction. This is a completely self-inflicted disaster, where Trump's ego and his need to fight back are destroying what remains of his business empire. Keep watching this closely because asset seizures of this magnitude don't happen overnight, but once they start moving, they're very difficult to stop.